Welcome to another episode of Culturally and Technically Legal, the show where we examine the intersections of culture, law, and technology. Today, we have another amazing guest, Mr. Rah Thomas. Rah is a managing director at Accenture for 20 years. He is a senior client account lead, the Northeast Products Cloud lead, the executive sponsor for inclusion and diversity, the delivery lead for Accenture's flagship innovation hub in New York. He also sits on the board of the Covenant House International. He chairs the board of CareerWise New York and chairs the advisory board for the New York City Job CEO Council. And he also happens to be a member of the most prestigious fraternity in the land, Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated. And he's also a very, very good friend of mine. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome Mr. Rah Thomas to the show. How you doing today, Rah?
I'm blessed and highly favored, man. Thanks for having me on, man. Great work you're
No,
doing.
thank you. I really appreciate it. Super excited to have you. Just your introduction alone, how are you juggling wearing so many hats?
Honestly, I gotta say that I'm not juggling it. I think to be vulnerable, I'm not juggling it. I think I there's a lot of things that fall, a lot of things that go well, but I think the one thing I do is I get back up every day and I keep working and chipping away at making change.
I think that's the best motto and the best process to move forward. Obviously, I mentioned so many different organizations that you're a part of on a professional level, on a corporate level, right? But before we jump into that, do you think you could give us a little bit about your personal background, prior to you, becoming this corporate person or getting into Accenture? Just give us a scope of like what Rah Thomas was before that and who Rah Thomas is.
Absolutely. And I think it's important, obviously, saying COVID, you have to understand your past in order to move forward. So I think that my background is, I came from poverty, single mother. My father was in prison my whole entire life. My brother's been locked up for the past 15 years. He actually gets out this year. So I've seen a lot of my friends and family go through the different struggles, and it's as James Baldwin said, it's incredibly expensive to be poor in America. So I really understand the concept of poverty, and then all of that, then jumping into corporate America and becoming a senior executive and a cloud executive, technology executive. I never forget where I come from, so I wear that lens in everything that I do.
Well, that's an amazing story because I think that story is often a lot of people can associate to that, right? How do you get out of this environment? What have been some of the things you think that has kind of helped you really, come from that type of environment? Like what things did you learn in those spaces, I'll say, that has kind of helped you to move forward to where you are at now?
One of the biggest things that I learned was that I'm actually only as good as my network, believe it or not. And I was blessed to have such amazing people around me. Yeah, a lot of folks, they might have been hustling on the street, but it was weird because they all looked out for me. And everybody was like, "Nah, make sure this dude doesn't smoke," or make sure this dude stays on the basketball court. And it was good because the entire community sort of gathered around me. And as I failed, as I moved, as I did everything, everybody always continued to invest in me and lift me up. So I take that into corporate America, that I keep a solid crew around me at all times, right? I continue to expand my network and get out of my comfort zone and figure out how to see through the surface level of what people are seeing and see the true value in every individual.
I think that's extremely important. I think one of the things you hit on was community, right? And how important community is, right? You're within the community at Accenture, right? And you play a lot of roles at Accenture and within the community as a whole. Can you help us unpack that a little bit? Maybe we start off on the technology end and how you got to Accenture. Could you give us a little bit of a description and perspective into that?
Absolutely. So, obviously went to Syracuse University, graduated, was amazing, but came out, man, I struggled, man. I couldn't find a job. And it was a tough time for a good 2, 3 years. I was just being like a help desk technician. I was on the grind, I was on the hustle. And finally I got a call from Accenture and they brought me in, and I worked from the very bottom as a program, as a developer. And actually, first supervisor an alpha, and he gave me some good advice and said, "Hey, I want you to be the first one in and the last one out, and I want you to take my job." And over the next 6 to 8 months, I learned everything I could about VPN concentrators and .NET programming, and I worked my tail off. And eventually he went on, and I took his role. But it taught me something, and it's something that I try to bring to society today, because often today I know we get caught into the mental health, and we get caught into a lot of things. It's like, all right, make sure I'm doing my 9 to 5, and I need to be paid for this, and I need to bow. But there's a hunger that I grew up on the street that I took with me into corporate America, to say, hey, man, you got to be hungry. You got to want this 20 times more than the next person, and you got to be willing to fight for it. You got to be willing to work twice as hard in order to get to where you want to go. So that hunger I take with me.
No, that's dope. And I think one of the things you mentioned is being the first one there and being the last one to leave, right? A lot of people talk about those stories, and you hear people say it, but could you describe some of the things that come with that? And what I mean by that is, a lot of times when you're the last one there, everyone left the office, someone needs something. You're the guy next to the phone that can answer. And then it's like, oh, man, like that Rah, he definitely puts those hours in. Or you're getting that call from that senior level executive, and now he wants to have lunch with you because you did him a favor. So briefly describe what that meant to you, and what were some examples of how being the first one there and the last one to leave, steered your career and gave you just these nuggets of saying, this is important stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I study people, man. I study people, and one thing I learned about being the first one in is who's there, right? And if you look on your Teams or your Zoom or whatever, you see all your folks. You look at, when do people turn green on their video, right? When do people actually show up in the office, and you'll recognize that most of the most senior people are up early working, right? The most senior folks are up early, right? And I learned, even some of my senior execs that I talked to, they get up at 5 o'clock, go for a quick jog, or check email, go for a quick jog, help their kids get to school or whatever like that, and jump back on. But they're up early, working early. So that was the first thing. If I really wanted to get in contact with somebody, I knew that I needed to talk to them at 6 a.m. in the morning. I'd be the first email on the top of their box and be like, hey, man, I need a quick 5 minutes. Can we jump on a call? So that was the get in early. To get in late and to stay late, I mean, it was always something to do. You can always keep yourself occupied. I was doing different trainings. I used to do my personal development, web development, and stuff like that. So if I finished all my work, I would stay for an extra hour or two, and I would do some coding. But then, yeah, you're right. The executive would be like, oh man, I got to get this deliverable done. I'm still not done, and nobody's in the office. They pop their head up in the cubicle and look around, and there I am, like, yo, you need help? I got you, right? And that's literally how I made most of my connections, was in being the first one in, the last one out, being there to lift up and help folks when nobody else was there.
Yeah, it's definitely a way people can really see, your soft skills, or see your hard work and your dedication to it. To slightly shift gears for a moment, you talked about, the work you've done with the cloud, right? Early on, we mentioned it. For those who might not necessarily understand the cloud, right? People hear a little bit about it in their relationship with their Netflix, their Google Drive accounts, etc. Could you briefly describe what cloud computing is for those who have no idea what it is, no idea how it works, but they may use it on a day-to-day basis, but just have no fundamental understanding of what cloud computing actually is?
Absolutely. And I might even simplify a bigger one on top of that. So actually, I'm going to start with overall infrastructure, because infrastructure is inside of cloud. Infrastructure is based on 5 main pillars, right? You have your data center, where all your information is going to get stored, your email, your pictures, all that data goes into this data center. Then you have the network, which is how everything's connected, right? You got your 5G network, all this stuff. So how do things connect from the data center to your another asset, et cetera? You have service management. So how do you support all those things in infrastructure? How do you support your network? How do you support your data center? Very important. You have collaboration, your teams, your end user Office 365, your productivity tools. All that stuff is your end user computing services. And then you have end user computing, so collaboration, and then end user devices. So your laptops, your cell phones, et cetera, right? So all of these is the infrastructure, right? What cloud is? Cloud is, you have this data center here, and for a long time, folks are investing so much into this data center to upgrade and maintain, et cetera, with so much. And then, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it was Amazon, and Amazon was one of the first to really double down on it. And they said, hey, let's just stop building data centers and renting them out to people. And it was like, wow, wait a minute, that makes sense, right? because then they can just invest in the data center. Whereas other companies, you had folks like Pfizer, and they were trying to work on R&D, and you had folks like, other folks that do different products and services. Well, they were just saying, hey, we're just going to focus on building data centers. So they built all these data centers, and then they were able to rent them out, right? Sorry about that. So they were able to rent them out. And that's really what the cloud is, right? The cloud is just leveraging somebody else's data center. But what happens though when you do that is you now get the advantage of all the benefits of that data center. So when you have your Microsofts and your Amazons and your Googles, they're investing $3-4 billion a year in research and AI into this data center to make it a top tier facility. And then you just get to use it, right? You just come in and now you're paying to use it, right? And now that this introduces a concept of as a service, right? So now you're just using it as a service as opposed to owning it. When you got a data center, you gotta pay for people to upgrade the software. You gotta pay for people to go fix it when it breaks down. You gotta pay for the land. You gotta buy the facilities, the cooling. You gotta keep it cold so that the data runs. So all that stuff, you don't gotta do that. You just rent it, right? And you can focus on what you want to do. So that's where the as a service comes, and that's sort of where the whole thing is moving in the direction. Is more as a service as opposed to buying it out, running it, and running it on your own. Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense. And I think you said it's kind of moving towards more so as a service. In what other ways would you say this cloud computing technology has somewhat evolved over the last decade or so? Because I think when I first started hearing about it, maybe in the last 5 years, last decade, it wasn't where it is today in regards to what you can do on your phones, how I can back things up, et cetera. So what have some of the evolution been, and where do we see this potentially going?
Absolutely. Yeah. So like I said before, it was, now I'm just renting, and it was just a consumption model, which is really great. So folks was like, hey, if I don't use all of this stuff, I don't got to pay for all of it, right? So instead of me building, these terabytes upon terabytes on data centers, or petabytes upon petabytes of data centers, and only using 1 petabyte, and I'm paying for everything, now I can just pay as you go, and only pay for your consumption. So the first sort of evolution around cloud was like, hey, let's move to the cloud so that way I could be more efficient on my spending, right? And that was the main push for cloud, 10 years ago. The main push for cloud right now is innovation, right? Because now you have the Gen AI and you have all these things. And so now I'm just like, hey, wait a minute. Now that I have all my data in the cloud, can I run, Microsoft's, Gen AI bot, or can I run, AWS's Gen AI on it, on my data? And now I'm driving insights that I couldn't have fathomed, right? Now they're going to look through all of my data, and they're going to be able to give me more valuable insights on my business. Right. So that consumption as a service model is a combination of a financial endeavor, but now it's moving more towards an innovative endeavor, if that makes sense.
No, that makes 100% sense. And I think you talked about generative AI, obviously, is something amongst that people are just all into right now. It's a hot topic, big conversation. And you talked about
Yeah.
the role that is going to play in the cloud. How significant will that role be? And what I guess what are some of the changes we're going to see? And will it make a better how will it make a better experience for us all?
Yeah. So, and when we talk about Gen AI, I'm going to be a Gen AI. I'm a push Gen AI around a little bit real quick. Hopefully the bot doesn't come back at me. But so I mean, Gen AI is definitely the future, right? It's actually today, but I don't think we fully comprehend it today. Right. In Accenture, we talk about a lot of different forces. We talk about, 5G and the impact of 5G. We talk about metaverse and this whole digital reality and the digital self and how your digital identity is going to evolve. So all of these things are starting to just swirl around, right? And I think that we have to get comfortable with them, right? I think the benefit of the post-COVID era is folks started getting more comfortable with technology, and we started accelerating that rapid change. And that's probably the biggest thing, is your ability to adapt to change. So what Gen AI is actually going to really start to open up for us. Here's a use case you have here. One of my clients worked for Pfizer. Unfortunately, he passed away from a very, very rare disease, an ocular cancer. And his last month we were still working, and he came to me and he said, Rah, one of the things I hate most about all this stuff is that I know that inside of this R&D and inside of all this data inside of our data center that I manage, the cure for cancer is here. We just haven't found it yet, right? And Gen AI is going to be able to do that for us, right? Gen AI, once we start to figure out how to ask the right questions and how to sift through and clean up the data a little bit more, but all of the data to solve all of our problems is already existing, right? We just haven't found it yet. And Gen AI is going to accelerate that. Now, there's some caution to that, is that we've got a lot of bad data too, right? And I think that's why the concept of ethics is becoming more and more prevalent as we talk about generative AI, because we have a lot of data that said, hey, listen, it's okay to own humans for a long period of time. And that was prevalent throughout all of our society. And that's in our data, right? So how do we make sure that as we're generating solutions, for instance, one of my biggest pet peeves is PMI. I hate PMI and the concept of paying more because you don't have money, right? But Gen AI is going to start solving that problem and saying, hey, listen, why don't we fix it so we know exactly who can pay back their loan, how they can do it, help them do it when they can't, as opposed to charging them more. And then you're starting to make things more equitable. So the concept of value is going to be coming to question, and really we need to push ethics as we're bringing forth a new embracing of technology and generative AI.
Wow, that's super interesting. And I think that mindset and perspective, and you shared about one of your clients at Pfizer. Could you talk a little bit more about your role? Because, like I said, you wear many hats. It kind of can seem like an engineer to one degree, but your actual title is a senior client account lead. Could you talk a little bit about what you exactly do within that role for Accenture?
Absolutely. So I'm the senior client account lead for Louis Vuitton Moet and Hennessy, which has been fun over the past year or two. And I think I started as a programmer, and I actually have a blueprint for success. Quick side note: blueprint for success. If you really want to accelerate within your path towards leadership, there's a lot of engineering and tactical and technical skills that you need to do, and that's a pyramid. But as you get more senior, the need for those things starts to diminish a little bit. And then there's an upside down pyramid, which is more about your relationships and your business sense and your business acumen. So if you really want to accelerate, you got to learn both at the same time as you rise. So that way you'll be better positioned. So as I became more senior, I started to understand more about the value and the business value and the impact and the influence of things. And so that's what I focus on. So I moved from being just a technical minded person to being an influential business minded person. So I still have all my engineering, I still have my technology, stuff like that. But that client account lead hat, I do everything across the business now. So I'm not just doing technology. I do everything from helping them with their sales, their clienteling, their marketing, technology, all the way through their operations, finance, and procurement, right? So that full breadth of it, I do that for clients now.
Oh wow, that's like super incredible, and that still seems like a lot. Even though you say you kind of lesser on certain technical skills, and you kind of build out the more business acumen thing. To pivot a little bit, right? We talked a little bit about Accenture's flagship innovation hub, and you play a role within that. Could you talk a little bit about your role in help building that out at Accenture?
Absolutely, absolutely. So that was probably one of my favorite projects because Accenture had asked me to take on this role. And normally when you building out these buildings, it's usually coming from like a corporate real estate person. But they said, Rob, you have a very interesting play here. You ran our workplace practice and a lot of our cloud stuff and our technology. You wear a diversity hat, so you really focused on our people. You understand the climate and the engineering behind it. So can you be sort of the point person to build out our space, our innovation hub? And I had to bring all of Accenture together to figure out how can we affect our business the best going forward. So inside of the hub, man, I had to build out technology that we haven't even used yet, right? Technology that's so far 10 years in advance, and we're still trying to bring these things on. So I built out facial recognition and everything, so you could walk into a conference room and it knows exactly who you are, log you into the meeting, right? And the next person walks in, he's like, oh wow, wait a minute, dude, and another name pops out and says, oh wow, John's also here, Hakeem's also here, right? So that's dope, right? So I built in the infrastructure and the technology for the future while balancing the human at the core, right? And making sure that I'm an artist too, as you can see. I got a few of my art pieces in the back of me. But I try to balance art, humanity, technology. You gotta sort of bring it all together into a work of art, believe it or not. So it was a pleasure to bring all of Accenture together in this innovation hub.
Wow, no, that sounds amazing. And I think you talk about bringing these different groups together, and you hold a role as an executive sponsor for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And obviously, diversity comes in all forms, right? The way you think, the way you look, etc. It's a big nutshell of things that you can describe as diversity. What makes you want to hold a role like this, and why is that important to you?
You know, you know, I'm gonna sit back on this one because this one's it's dear to my heart because I've evolved. I'm not gonna lie, I was probably a little bit more militant when I was back in college. And I was very pro-black. And I used to fight the fight on the racial thing for a long time. And about 5 or 6 years ago, uh, CEO of Accenture and CHRO of Accenture pulled me over and they took me to a women's conference and sort of put me in an interesting position. And I had an epiphany and I recognized that, diversity, equity, inclusion, all that stuff, it's not about me. It's about what I can do for the folks that are being disproportionately, taken advantage when it doesn't have anything to do with me, right? And I was like, that was interesting. So I started to pull that back a little bit more. And then I recognized that there was a commonality on all of these things. And the real thing that we need to focus on from equity, inclusion, and diversity is not necessarily, I mean, yeah, it's bad if you call somebody a bad name. It's bad this, and people call racism on that. And to me, that's not racism, but it's the actual impact to value. It's the actual economic change. So similar, I go through my AAS degree and say, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, they've changed their strategies towards economics and away from race, right? So I've changed my entire thing and say, okay, well, how do we figure out how to fix poverty, right? How do we figure out how to give people who don't have an opportunity, right? That's what we're really trying to do, right? And yes, if you look at that, you'll see this disproportionate Black people or disproportionate LGBTQ or disproportionate women, right? You'll see all those other characteristics. But the reality is that they're being deprived something and we need to give them something, right? We should give homeless people a home. We should give poor people, food and shelter. So I changed my mindset on the equity side, and now I'm focused purely on economics and figuring out how to eradicate poverty and its effect on humanity.
No, I think that's beautiful. That's like a world changing type of mentality. Do you take that perspective into your role with the New York City Job CEO Council? Or have you ever utilized that plan and say, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how we change the world from here?
Absolutely. I mean, so first off, for those of you that don't know, the New York City Job CEO Council is a council of, top 50 corporations in North America, and they came together after George Floyd and said, all right, how do we change this systemic racism thing? And then they said, let's start with New York. Let's pull together a council and let's start hiring 100,000 jobs. Let's give 100,000 jobs to Black and Latino people in low income circumstances. Let's focus on community colleges. Let's focus on, poverty areas and figure out how to build this out. And that's what the vision was. And they said, we're going to hire 100,000 people in 10 years and really start to change the system. And we started working on that. And we made some progress, but not nearly the amount of progress that we need to make. But the thing about it is that in order to make the progress we need to make, we actually have to change the system. And I think that my role over the past 2 or 3 years has evolved, and now I chair the advisory board for that, is because I bring that poverty part into it. It's like, hey, bring this poverty back in, right? So very quickly, when we start talking about diversity and talent, we start getting, I want the smartest Black person, and everybody goes to the top PWIs, predominantly white institutions, and they try to get the smartest Black person, and they go to the HBCUs and they try to get the smartest Black person. I'm like, yes, that's great, but everybody's still fighting for the same talent. And the focus that I'm trying to bring into the council and bring into society is that we need to build the talent. We need to, right now we have District 15, which is the poorest congressional district in the United States, in the Bronx. The poorest district in the United States is in the Bronx, right? My kid goes to school here, right? And that's what we need to fix. It's 92% Black and Latino. So folks says, where are the Black people? They're right here, right? And we actually have to build that talent right here, right? I'm actually building a delivery center in the Bronx, and where I'm going to teach folks the skills in the Bronx, $65,000 a livable wage, and we're going to teach them the skills, and they're going to be successful because we're going to invest in them appropriately. So we got to build that talent.
Wow, no, that's I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. And obviously, I know we're running short on time, so I just want to ask you one last question before you head out. Um, you seem like you're very straightforward. You are who you are. What is the importance of bringing your authentic self to the table every time, whether you're in a corporate space, whether you're back home with family, but I think most importantly, corporate spaces, because you hear these words about code switching and changing. Could you talk about the importance of really bringing your authentic self to the workspace, particularly?
Yeah, I mean, you can't be anybody else but yourself. I mean, to keep it 100, right? And I think that I don't think folks get to see enough of the diversity of Black people, believe it or not. And I think that's why. I mean, we started this part, this cast, right? With I mean, I'm from poverty. My father was in prison my whole entire life. My brother's been locked up. He gets out this year. I mean, I wear that like I wear it, right? I talk the way I talk. I move the way I move, but I still can I can rock with the best of them in cloud. You heard my expertise in technology. You heard where I do an innovation. But I gotta be out there. I still rock my locks. We still coming with it, right?
I love that. I love
But
that.
right. My son goes to Howard, right? He's repping Howard. But you got to be yourself, and I bring all of myself because so many times, and I started off with my mental health too. I also listen. I go through my stuff, and I fail a lot. The difference between somebody who's successful and somebody who's failed is the person who's successful tried one more time, right, to be successful, right? So you got to keep on, pushing. You got to keep moving. You got to be the best version of yourself, and the best way to change the world is to change yourself and continue to evolve yourself. So I work on myself. I work on how I can be better every day, and be authentic, right? And that way I can, believe it or not, I influence a lot of people by doing that.
Thank you guys for watching another episode of Culturally and Technically Legal. We had a great conversation with Rah Thomas from Accenture. He dropped a lot of jewels, a lot of gems, and really what you took from it. Being your authentic self is okay, right? In the era of imposter syndrome, in the era of code switching, it's okay to be who you are. Thank you again for watching that episode, and looking forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you. Bye.